Act like you're Brett Michaels. Hey. Hey guys, this is Patrick Hall with Fstoppers.com, and today we're going to be comparing the Nikon 50 1.2 to the Nikon 50 1.4 lens. So the 50mm 1.2 lens, I think this thing came out in like 1980, 1981, so it's a super old lens. Nikon actually still makes this, but a lot of people love it because it's the only lens that Nikon makes that has the 1.2 aperture, at least in the 50mm variety. The problem with this lens is it's a manual focus lens, which means you're not going to get all the benefits of autofocus, and in many cases, it's extremely hard to get very sharp images when you're shooting wide open. Now, if we compare this lens to the Nikkor 50 1.4 lens, this lens has kind of all the modern features. It's actually a little bit older of a lens. I would imagine that Nikon's probably going to update this soon. But compared to this, you get autofocus. You have the manual autofocus button here on the side, so you can override that. You get better optics. Everything about this lens is better from a technological standpoint, but it only goes to f1.4. So you're probably asking yourself, how much of an advantage is it to have a 1.4 lens versus a 1.2 lens? Well, the 1.2 lens is only about half of a stop faster than the 1.4 lens. And what does that gain you? Well, it basically helps you in two different ways. One is because this lens here is going to gather more light and send it to your sensor. You're going to be able to shoot a similar exposure with a slightly lower ISO. So if you're shooting in low light, this is definitely going to be a lot more useful, but you're only going to save about half a stop in ISO. The other advantage is the wider your aperture is on your lens, the more blurring effect or bokeh you're going to get, because it's going to blur out anything that's not in focus much faster. So with the 1.2 lens, the idea should be that you get a much blurrier background, a much more shallow depth of field than the 1.4. How much of a difference is this half a stop in terms of bokeh and blurry background? Well, we're going to test that here in a minute. Another big difference between these two lenses is the minimum focusing distance. And what that really means is how close can you get your camera and lens to your subject while still being able to retain focus. This is super useful if you want to take tight headshots, or if you want to do product shots, or if you want to approach something that's more like a macro photograph. Now, the 1.2 lens can only go to 19.7 inches before it loses the ability to focus, where the more modern 1.4 lens can go to about 16.8 inches. So you're actually able to get much closer with the newer lens than you can with the older lens. Now, we do use this lens a lot for really dreamy portraits, and it's also extremely useful for video. Video is a little more forgiving than high megapixel images. So sometimes we'll put this lens on our Nikon cameras or our Panasonic cameras, and it allows us to shoot in incredibly low light, and it also gives us a really dreamy look, which is pretty cool. But exactly how much more effective is the 1.2 lens over the 1.4 lens in a studio setting like this? Well, let's test it out. Now, since we're going to be shooting with hot lights in our background, these Christmas lights, I figured it would probably make the most sense to light our subject also with a hot light. So I'm going to be using a B1 made by Profoto, and because this flash has a built-in modeling lamp, I'm going to be able to get the exact same color as our background, and I'm going to be able to dial down the power of the modeling lamp, which is going to be really useful because we're shooting at such a wide open aperture. Now, instead of just using this light hard like it is now, I'm simply going to take our flash disc, pop it on top of this light, and then I'm going to be able to get a nice small little softbox effect, which is going to be a little bit more flattering of a light. So let's get David in here, let's try to get a cool picture out of this, and see if we can even tell the difference between these two lenses. So here we are, we got David in position. I got this light on a nice arm here that we can kind of move around, and my idea is just to light him straight from over top. But just so you guys know, we're at ISO 640, I'm wide open at 1.2, and my shutter is at 60th of a second. So I could bump up my ISO and have a faster shutter, but I think I'm good here at 60. And as you can see from this photograph, we have really blurry lights. You can't even really tell they're Christmas lights. And you can see the flag back there. It's, you know, it's just an interesting portrait, I guess, but it's a little bland, don't you? I mean, look, you think is that gonna cut it for Fstoppers?
I'm not the best model.
No, but I bet we could get you looking cool.
All right. What you got in mind?
Oh yeah, these look great. That really makes this special. You look a little special. You're like a 30-year-old, 8-year-old. I personally like these, but I think the crown might be a little much. Let's get rid of the crown. You actually kind of look like Shaun White or something.
I have gotten that before.
Is this like what Shaun White looks like when he wins the 2018 Olympics? So now that I've taken a bunch of pictures with the 50-1.2, let's trade this out and let's shoot a few shots with the 1.4. Ah, the sound and feel of autofocus. Wow, this is way easier. And you can see as I take pictures, the closer I get to David and I utilize that minimum focusing distance, the more I can blur out the background. But at 50 millimeters, it kind of gets to a point where I'm so close to him that his face is warping, and it's not really the best portrait lens, but if I step too far back, I'm not really exploiting that blurry out of focus background as much. So I could definitely see this being more useful on a longer lens, but in the 50 millimeter range, I don't know that I'm really seeing that big of a difference in camera at a reasonable distance for like a headshot or portrait. So now that we've taken some shots at 1.2 and 1.4, let's open these up large on the screen and see if we can really see a difference when we zoom in. This is the older 1.2 lens, and as you can see, the depth of field is extremely shallow. Obtaining focus is very difficult, and only about 70% of my photos were even in focus. Here's the 1.4 lens, and it clearly has a different color profile. It too has a very narrow depth of field, but since this lens is an autofocus lens, 95% of the shots that I took were perfectly in focus. Side by side, these two images don't look that different, but if we zoom into the skin where it was actually in focus, you can tell how much sharper the 1.4 lens is compared to the older 1.2. Now, it would not be fair to mention 50 millimeter lenses without mentioning the Sigma version. We do not actually own that lens, so I can't put it into this comparison, but the Sigma version it's 1.4 as well, just like this. It has autofocus as well. It's $950, so it's way more expensive than both of these lenses. People swear by it, they think it's the sharpest lens out there. It also has the shortest minimum focusing distance at 15 inches. So if you were to have the Sigma, you're gonna be able to get closer, perhaps the images are sharper, but the Sigma lens comes at a cost. It's $200 more than the 1.2 lens, and it's more than double the price of Nikon's 1.4 lens. So at the end of the day, how do I feel about this lens? Well, it's kind of a novelty. It's pretty cool to shoot at 1.2, but as you can see, the images are really soft, and it's extremely hard to get these images completely in focus, especially if you're focusing really close to your subject. If I was shooting a professional job or a wedding or something, I would definitely want the autofocus of the 1.4. And if I loved a 50 millimeter lens and used it all the time, I might actually get the Sigma lens because it's the absolute best one on the market according to the reviews online. So I think this is cool. Obviously we own both lenses. We use this a lot more for video to kind of get that dreamy effect and to really use it in low light. But most of the time I'm reaching for my Nikon 50 millimeter 1.4. If you guys like video content like this, subscribe to our YouTube channel below, and also head over to fstoppers.com where we feature photography content every single day. And if you want to learn from some of the best photographers in the industry, head over to the fstoppers.com/store where we have a variety of full-length photography tutorials.